In this clip I will introduce you to the main steps during doing research. This is the first chapter of Breiman. He writes in this first chapter that he is not going yet to put all these elements in a certain order, as you see. So he says, I don't do that because in different research strategies the order might differ. But I would do it differently. I would think it makes sense to already make some order here and put this in this sequential order from 1 to 7. Now let's briefly look at them. Here they are again. I put literature review and theory in one box. So often you start at the top, of course, with a research question. For instance, why do some people vote for the Democrats and others for the Republicans? You're going to read in the literature. Maybe the answer is already there. Then you don't need to do your research, maybe at all. And maybe in the literature you don't find a satisfying answer, so you think there is no more research needed, and then you're going to do a research design. For instance, you think about I want to interview people to ask them about their vote choices, and in this research design step you need to think about how many people am I going to interview, where do I find these people, etc. Data collection is the actual data gathering itself, so the doing the interviews itself, and then after that, of course, you're going to analyze and interpret the answers and write a report about it. I made a circle here because it's a cycle often like this research, in the sense that when a research is finished, you come up with new questions or new societal developments happen and new questions emerge, so the whole process is repeated again. I talked already briefly about this research design, selecting cases, selecting people often, but also selecting a location. But it includes much more, really, but we will talk about it later. Breiman writes in this first chapter that it's about selecting cases, but I changed this into research design. There's a more general term for much more. Think about time, for instance. You don't need to think only about how many people are going to select and where to find them, but also, for instance, how long are these interviews going to take place, and how often you might even decide to think, well, I want to interview people twice, or maybe even 5 times, or every year, or maybe you think of a design of a research of 3 years where you interview people every month, maybe. I don't know. It could in theory happen. Theory, we also will talk about it later in a separate video, because it deserves some more attention. It's put now here after the research question, but maybe that's not the best place. I would say it's maybe better to put it in the center, as here. But we will talk about it later, why we put it in the center here. The short answer is, well, theory always plays a role, not only in a specific step during the research, but you basically can always go back to the literature and think like, okay, what does the literature say about this? For instance, you're analyzing data and you think, oh, this is strange, and you go back to the literature to look if others found something similar, for instance, or how it fits in the theory. Let's look at the first step. That's the main step, maybe even, because the research question basically determines the whole research process. Now, these questions can, of course, have different origins, different motivations for certain questions. It could be very, of course, scientific question, or it could, of course, be very practical, that you see a very clear societal problem and you want to solve this problem. So we will see later in the course that there are different types of research, more fundamental or more practical research. We can distinguish 4 type of questions generally, right? It's not so strict, but generally we can form 4 groups: exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, and evaluative. I will explain this in the next slide. And what I already said, the research question is very important, so be very spend a lot of time to formulate your question. Why Well, because it influences which literature you're going to search for. Your research design is heavily dependent on your question. Later, during the data analysis, you have to think what I'm going to do. It depends all on your question. So, if you don't go over too quickly this first phase. Now let's look at these different kind of questions, and I just will illustrate them with an example here from a study among Cambridge University students, and it was a study about mindfulness and how to reduce the stress and improve the mental health of students during exam periods. Now let's look at these different questions that I already mentioned. What kind of different questions can you formulate if you are interested in this topic? Well, this exploratory question, this first category, would be something like, okay, what are mental health problems? What kind of issues are students dealing with? What is the students' perception about these different issues? So it basically means that you don't know yet very much about the topic. That's why it's more like an inventory. Descriptives, then you know already some more. You already, for instance, have a very clear definition on what are mental health problems exactly, because you're going to investigate how many students, for instance, suffer from these mental health problems. So then you need, of course, already have some idea about what are specific different problems. You can also think about the question like how students perceive their own well-being would also be a descriptive question. The next step would be more an explanation, so that would often be a why question. Why are some students stressful and others are not stressed at all? Why have some students problems with mental health issues and others not at all? Which factors have a positive and negative influence? That's an explanatory question. And then we have also, finally, number 4, an evaluation question. So that goes again a step further. Once you know some explanations, some causes, you can design a program to improve the situation. And if you ask, like, is this program really effective? Is this intervention effective? Then you have an evaluative question. So, for instance, this specific study was about a mindfulness course. If we offer this to students, does it really improve their mental health, or does it reduce stress? It would be a category number 4, these specific studies, but the differences are not always so sharp and clear between these 4 categories. Is it possible to not have any research question at all? You might maybe wonder. Breiman says, like, well, unless your supervisor advises to the contrary, I would definitely formulate some research question. I would even go further. So you don't need to listen always to your supervisor. I would say even if your supervisor says, like, yeah, you don't need to have a question, I would say still think about the question. Even if it's very general, global, even if you think, like, I have a question, but it's not, maybe I will change it a little bit during the process, still then I would at least formulate a global question.